Hey, y'all. Tonight, I'm excited for part 2 of Evolutionary Biology Misconceptions with Dr. J. Bundy, or Pocket Locker 86. So sit back, buckle up, and let's get to the sunny spot on Skeptic Haven.
Jefferson laid great stress on it. It wasn't enough, he said, to enshrine some rights in a constitution or a Bill of Rights. The people had to be educated, and they had to practice their skepticism and their education. Otherwise, we don't run the government. The government runs us.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Yes. So I'm so glad to have you back.
Happy to be back.
Yes, we had so much fun last time. We just had to have a part 2. And, you know, we have a lot of really cool things that we're going to be talking about. We have some great questions and so forth. And if you are in our live chat and would like to ask us questions, feel free to do so as well. But before we get started, Jay, could you tell us a little bit about first where people can find you, maybe some of the things that you've been up to? What are some of the things you would like to share with everyone real quick?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Pocket Locker 80, or my name's Dr. J. Bundy. I go by Pocket Locker 86. You can find me on Pocket Locker 86 is the name of my YouTube channel. I'm also a lot of times in chat as Hunter Biden's laptops. That's my alt account. I'm an evolutionary biologist, experimental evolutionary biologist. I do primarily digital evolution. We talked a little bit about that on our last stream, but I'll just mention that for people who want to know sort of why am I here to talk about evolution. It's my job. I'm an evolutionary biologist. I teach and do research. I'm also like a former believer. I come from a family of ministers. My grandfather's a Pentecostal bishop. I went to Catholic school. My dad went to a Methodist church. I went to like a non-denominational church. I used to work at a church, actually. It used to be my job to share the gospel with people. So, I come into the skeptic community like many people as a former believer and servant of the church, actually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So, I came from several different ones: Seventh-day Adventist, Southern Baptist, and then Buddhism. So I even dabbled in Wicca a little bit.
Oh, and then Buddhism.
Yes.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I actually love Buddhism, but more of the secular Buddhism or Buddhist,
yes.
Yes. There's some really great stuff. There's also some stuff that's not so great, but
okay, so here's a question. Do you think that the sort of, I don't know, monotheistic, the traditional faiths we think of, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, can you see those establishing a secular tradition the way Buddhism did? No.
Not at all.
No.
Can you?
Yes and no. Certainly not willingly. Certainly not of their own accord. So I sometimes wonder what will happen to the institutions, like the churches, the Catholic schools, the Catholic hospitals, sort of all these religious institutions. I think they'll find a way to cope in a secular world. Like you just become a regular hospital. You kind of you might keep the name Saint whatever's hospital, but you just sort of remove the weird parts of your mission statement or whatever. So I definitely think the institutions will find a way to be secular, because I don't think they'll just like go away. But I think for the church, the faith, the sort of organized religion, I don't know. I don't think they can.
I don't think they can because of how it's structured. I mean, if you think about it, they have to. I mean, their tenets and their focus is on following a deity,
right?
That tells them what's right and what's wrong. Whereas Buddhism, the leader of Buddhism, the Buddha himself, did not consider himself a deity. He was just a man who found a path towards to end suffering, right? And
So
so,
there's
if you follow the path to end suffering, everyone can be a Buddha, and that makes it easy to take all the other crap out and just look at, be kind to each other, and the other things that are there. I won't go into because that's not really what this show is about. But you know what I'm saying? It's
Yes.
easier to do that
Yes.
than when you have Christianity, Christ. How can you remove
the
the
divine
supernatural from
aspect.
that? You
Yes.
see?
Yes. I largely agree with that. I think I got to a place myself towards the end where I was just trying to hold on to the identity. I was trying to make it work, but it was definitely rejected by both Christians and secular people. Like nobody's feeling that. So I do wonder about it sometimes because that's where I hope we get to. Like I hope we get to a point where it's just more commonly accepted that these ideas probably are not substantiable. Like we can't substantiate them based on the evidence. And so then it's like the ball's in their court. Like how are they gonna handle that? But yeah, just thanks for indulging me.
Oh no, I love those kind of conversations. I don't really get to have them a whole lot, mostly because my thing is about science and promoting science and that sort of thing.
Sure.
We get to touch on it a little bit, but I can mostly do that when I'm over on the Women Atheist Unload. But I do love those conversations.
Sure.
So yeah, we can definitely, if you want us to have a conversation over on Women Atheist Unload sometime.
Well, I pop up over there from time to time. So
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
So I will say this. So I think we're going to be talking about these misconceptions about evolution, and I think that some of them come from this biologos, right?
Yes.
And I think that they're a very interesting case because I think that they're one of those organizations that, as I understand them, tries to sort of resolve faith in science and sees them as compatible and so they're pro-evolution, right? They're trying to bring these misconceptions up and address them from a place that is not like creationist bunk or nonsense. They're trying to tell people of faith, no, here's what's really up, and like it's okay. So they address them in a way that's mostly pretty accurate, but there's definitely some additional comments I might have because I'm coming at it from a different place, and maybe we should start there, right? Like with that whole effort, right? Because there's a lot of effort to make to think about the compatibility of faith and science. And I'll say this, I appreciate any organization that is doing education, right? Especially if you're debunking or you're teaching people accurately. I think all that's great. But sort of like going back to the conversation we were just having, I sometimes feel like those efforts are misguided. And I feel bad about that, to be honest, because I feel like I'm not nice. Like it doesn't make me feel like I'm being a nice guy and like I want to be nice and just tell everybody everything's wonderful. But one of the things I think people of faith struggle with and these type of organizations struggle with is they basically, their view of things is theological. This is God's world, God made it or whatever. But through science, you understand nature. And in a sense, they're integrated. To be honest, in a way, the view is not so foreign than what I think of like African spirituality. You'll hear these cultures, whether they're Native American cultures or cultures of other part of the world, and they'll talk about how, well, it's really difficult to talk about spirituality with these people as distinct from nature because they didn't really have that sort of distinction. And in a way, a lot of these current intellectual traditions are the same way, right? Because they see it as God created the world, so everything you learn in nature is a reflection on God because God made it that way. But to me, that gets back to that thing about that's theological and that's supernatural, right? And the science world again is just back to the basics. It's about providing natural explanations of natural phenomena. And so there's a way in which I don't think they take the natural phenomena part seriously. There's this way in which it's like they're trying to say, oh, God did everything. That means our supernatural story is true. But we can use this tool of science to understand God through nature, right? And I just think that that's not what science is for. Although I'm happy they're not antagonistic to science.
Right. Yeah. I could totally see what you're saying. I think my biggest problem, okay, let me step back. Like you, I'm glad that there are people who are not antagonistic towards science, that they're trying to figure out a way to accept the reality of science, even though they're still holding on to their theological beliefs. I think that's a very difficult process. And I think one thing that can happen is that once they figure out even a superficial way of marrying the two, then they stop. They don't think more about it. And that can be just as dangerous to them anyway as not even trying, in a sense. You know, you get to a point when you just stop. And I don't think that you can do both effectively. I don't think you can really do science effectively if you are still holding on to theological beliefs in any real sense. You could be like a non-practicing Jew. You know, that's a term I hear all the time. Well, maybe you're a non-practicing Baptist, but you you feel a kinship to that because that's how you were raised.
Right.
And so you consider yourself a Baptist, but you're actually a scientist. I mean, do you see what I'm saying, or not scientist?
To be honest, I think that's how most people are, right? There's certainly a lot of people in science who identify as Christian. Now, mostly I think they're in fields where this type of challenge isn't relevant to their work, so it's easier to compartmentalize. But yeah, I think that's largely what they do, and I did that for a long time, and then I realized that it didn't make sense to me to say at some point I'm suspending something about myself. It doesn't make sense to say I'm over here as in chemistry. I don't bring God into it because this is my job, and I'm just going to do it based on nature. But then on Sunday, I'm going to pretend that that person in my congregation who's sick might get a miracle cure, right? Like it doesn't, yeah. So Mike said he can't stay, but wanted to pass along my love. Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, I'm gonna also, I'm a big fan of Michael Beverly, and one of my mods recently connected us, so I'm gonna be on his channel early next month. Yeah, so awesome. Looking forward to that. But yeah, I'm a big fan, and I just think we're really lucky to have Michael. Kind of came out of nowhere. I found her. I'm sure like everybody else, like, man, where did this guy come from? This guy's stuff's really good. Appreciate you, Michael. And thank you so much for the donation. Yeah, thanks for the super chat, the Skeptic Haven. Really appreciate that. Very generous.
Thank you. Can't tell you how much we appreciate it. You're awesome. Thank you.
So yeah, I just wanted to say, like, I think that's a look. This is a sensitive topic, but I definitely think there's a lot of people who you said they don't take it further than that. I think they're like, this is my work. This is what I went to school for. This is what I do. This is what I do on the weekend. And it makes me feel like I'm part of the community and my family or whatever. And I think they've intentionally not thought about it much beyond that. Yeah.
Right. And, beliefs influence actions. And so I think that there is a negativity to that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
thinking about some of the misconceptions,
Sure, sure.
we're both talking about the same place. I'm not going to go in the order that they.
No, that's fine. Yeah, let's jump
that
around.
they put it in, because I think that this one is the very first one that I would love for you to address.
Sure. Oh, evolution
This is
is just a
something
theory.
we hear all the time.
Yeah. So I think a lot of times you hear people address this concern and they'll talk about what a scientific theory is, and the difference between what scientists mean when they say theory versus what lay people mean when they say theory. You know, more that when a lay person says they have a theory, they sort of have an idea or they have a hunch a lot of times, that they may be working off. Whereas with scientists, it's more we've observed things and we've had hypotheses and we've tested those things, and there's a really cohesive body of evidence that supports a scientific theory. That's certainly part of it. So we'll just pin that as part one, the distinction between the layman and technical definitions of the word theory. There's also an issue of hierarchy. So not just that the words mean something different, but that when a layperson thinks of a scientific theory, they think of it as sort of maybe there's hypotheses at some level, then maybe there's like theories above that. When you got to, your hypothesis hasn't been disconfirmed, so you keep going. And then maybe somewhere above theories, there's laws, and so when they say it's just a theory, the just a part, right, is sort of the diminishing it, putting it down. And they don't realize that we don't really see it as a hierarchy. There are certainly terms where you discuss certain well-supported theories as laws. So we talk about the law of gravity, for instance. But you could just as easily talk about the law of evolution, or, I've taught a class called Darwin's Law. So there's also a misunderstanding there, right? That there isn't necessarily this higher tier of scientific concepts that evolution is aspiring to. In other words, just a theory, but if it were true or if it were more well supported, it'd be a law or it'd be something more official sounding than a theory. And that's also a misconception. It's at the highest level, it's on par with any other scientific concept. Most, like I said, it's the foundation of modern biology. So there's no higher level for it to go to. But I also think overall, one of the things I like to highlight that I think is really wrong when people say that is not just that we're using the word theory differently. It's not just that there's this hierarchical notion. It's also that they're missing the fact that evolution is a fact. They're missing that it's a fact. It's not, and so there's an article by Stephen Jay Gould I recommend. It's called Evolution as Theory and Fact, but that's what it's emphasizing, is that this is something we now have enough evidence to know that it actually happened, and continues to happen. And so, to me, you can sidestep that whole conversation, not sidestep the whole conversation, because it's an interesting conversation about scientific theories and laws and things like that. But the most important thing that people are sort of saying when they say that is they're saying it's just an idea or it's just a science thing, and I can sort of dismiss it. I don't have to believe that it's something that actually happened, that it actually took place. And that's what I would always want people to understand, is that it's a fact. Evolution is a fact, just like you consider the Civil War or the Declaration of Independence or any of these things part of just historical facts. We would consider evolution the same thing.
Yep, absolutely. Before we go on to any others, we do have a question from the live chat.
Sure.
Gems. What made you fascinated about biology versus
No.
field?
It's not a question I'm always crazy about answering. So when I was sort of starting college, I thought I was going to go to law school. But like most young people, I was like really interested in dating in and so I thought at one point I was interested in being like a dating coach and starting a consulting company. And so I was reading about human mating. And unbeknownst to me, like a lot of the books I was reading, like Sperm Wars, The Selfish Gene, The Mating Mind, these were books about evolutionary biology. I thought of it as like I was trying to understand human behavior as a system. And it struck me that people did that with other organisms, that you could like study frog mating behavior, and that was like a legitimate thing to do. And I was like, if you understand human mating behavior, then like that's what you want. And I actually thought it was really interesting because it led to so many other things. Like once you started to think it that way, you understood business a lot better, you understood marketing a lot better. Like I got involved, a lot of the consulting I did was with politicians and working on campaigns, and it was sort of the same thing in terms of communicating value and understanding how to message to a population and different things, how to approach people on the streets and all those type of things. But that is what really got me into biology, and I didn't think about it at the time. I had an advisor who said to me, when you come back, I want you to take a course in evolutionary biology. And I said, have I ever said the word biology to you? Like I was actually offended. But yeah, at some level, being a creepy McCreeperson in college, like a lot of young people.
Oh my God. I think of a creepy McCreeperson in a totally different way, probably because of the work that I do. So you are not in any way a creeper.
No, I wasn't. No, I really wasn't that bad. But it was definitely, that was my interest, and that whole thing's gone a certain way, and I'm not like interested in it anymore. But it's definitely part of the story of how I got here. But the one thing I think is good about that is that it's a genuine story of personal motivation. I had a curiosity, I was interested in something, and that led me to studying and doing research. And then I had mentors who realized that and were like, yeah, you could make a career out of this. And I think that that's more the value I take from it, because obviously with other people that'll be different things, but it just shows that if you're motivated and you find something interesting, it is possible for it to lead to a legit career.
Okay, I've got to say a few things. That was so
Sure.
crazy. It was absolutely wonderful. I wanted to go to law school too when I was younger.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I took when I was in high school, I happened to have a business law class that they were giving, and so I just kind of wanted to know a little bit about it. And that's when I chose a different field. Because I met an attorney who told me it was like for a career day or something like that. And he said, girl, the hardest thing about being an attorney is being honest. And he was going through something. He was going through some stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I don't even want to have anything to do with this. I wish I would have stayed with it in some ways. But the other thing that's funny is that I had a professor in college who I was all about psychology. That's what I got my degree in. But I also have a degree in political science because I had an instructor say, yeah, have you noticed how all these electives you keep taking? Why don't you just stay an extra year and get a second degree? And I was like, what? Why would I do that? Like, because you can do a lot with that. You can learn a lot with that. It was some of the best things I ever did. But it's interesting to me, and like you said, you can have people who influence you, who can see something in you that you may not be able to see yourself.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And they can help you. It doesn't mean that you have to do what they're saying. It just means that they can open doors you wouldn't even thought would be open. And also, if you
Yes.
can keep your mind open to other possibilities and not just get hyper focused on one goal, you can find a whole world of wonderfulness.
Yeah, I
You
had a
know?
professor who, when I was like 18, like my freshman year, he would always call me Dr. Bundy. So we could come to class and see him like, Dr. Bundy. And I would laugh. I'd be like, fool, man, you know I'm going to law school. You know I want nothing to do with the PhD. I don't know why you keep saying that to me. And he would say it to me all the time.
Oh my
But
gosh.
yeah, that's exactly how it is. Yeah, outside
Look
perspective,
at you
exactly right,
now.
AR. Yeah, yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so we will now move on. But I really love that that you said that. I was just sitting here grinning from ear to ear. Okay, the next thing I want to talk to you about is evolution is controversial among scientists. So
Yeah.
is evolution in any way controversial among
You know
scientists?
what? It's really it's so interesting. I can't think of anything less controversial. No, it's definitely not controversial, but you do hear this a lot. And it is one of the things I wanted to speak to, and I think of it as like the frailty. See, part of this is why the theory question is so important, because there's a way when a person says it, it's like an innocent sort of misconception, like, or they're just repeating a thing they've heard, and they don't know any better. But there's also these professional anti-science people, and for them, feeding people that rhetoric of evolution is just a theory is very deliberate. And one of the reasons is because they realize that to the outside person, a theory is frail. It may have some evidence in favor of it, but it likely has other evidence against it. And it's sort of like this teetering act. And they really believe that anytime there's just going to be a revolutionary thinker or a revolutionary experiment or some problem that emerges, and all of a sudden the scientific consensus is just going to be, all haywire. And so that's really what this is about, is this notion that evolution is controversial among scientists. It's trying to get at this idea that it's controversial because it's really hanging in the balance. And any moment now, it's all going to come crumbling down. And that's not true. One of the things that they often do to support that is they will point to particular controversies. So we talked about one last time with the group selection. Was it something somebody asked about in the chat? Yeah, there are controversies around group selection. There are controversies around whether or not one mechanism explains a particular trait or something in a population versus another. And so what it's very easy to do, it's very easy to point out, oh, scientists are having these debates, or they're in these really hardline camps that don't agree with each other, and look at the back and forth going on over very particular conversations, none of which, no side of which is suggesting that there's anything wrong with evolution, but rather having a healthy debate about the prevalence of particular mechanisms. That's used to say, look, I told you it's controversial, and they don't really know what they're talking about. Now, I will say this, there are some things, like we talked about last time, like there are some people in science who think things like humans aren't as subject to evolution as they once were. And what they really mean when they're saying that is they're not saying that evolution isn't happening. They're saying something like, our culture and technology have moved us into a place where our social and cultural evolution is more of a driving force than striving against nature or whatever. For the most part, most of us would say that's inaccurate, and they shouldn't say that, and that they're kind of being irresponsible when they say things like that. But even but even taking what they're saying at face value, again, they're not saying evolution isn't happening. They're saying there's something different than natural selection that's driving our evolution. But that is one of the things people will point to as a controversy. And I will tell you that creationists like that particular controversy, because one of the wedges they want to drive is the argument that humans are distinct from nature, right? And so part of what they really care to argue overall is that humans didn't evolve. And so if they can get some scientific support and some scientists saying that humans aren't subject to evolution or aren't evolving under the same pressures and conditions that apply to the rest of the animal kingdom, then they think that's something they can really take and run with, right? But there's really nothing there. Again, they're mostly misrepresenting the science. So overall, no, it's kind of I think it would be remarkable to people how uncontroversial evolution is among scientists, in the sense that, like, it's boring to a lot of people. Like, those of us that are really excited about evolution, that are evolutionary biologists, that made evolution kind of our thing, like, we're kind of seen as weirdos. Everybody else kind of understands evolution is happening, and evolution's is the theory that explains how we get species, but they're super interested in answering some other thing, right? How do we conserve the pandas? How do we stop climate? How do we deal with climate change? How do we cure cancer? Like, how do we deal with viruses, right? So evolution's so uncontroversial, they've just moved on, right? They're into more practical areas, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of goes along with that in a sense. Evolution is man's word, creationism is God's word.
Yeah. So this one's, like, I find really, really interesting. And the main critique I have of this, because I think Biologos and other organizations do a pretty good job of explaining this, and I think where they're coming from a lot of times with this is understanding that evolution is a description of nature, and that since God is the creator, right? Like, their thing is God's word, God's world. Right. So that shows you the world that we have is the result of God's word and God's creation and all this. And, like, okay, that's fine, sure. but what's interesting about this to me is it's just evolution is man's word, creationism is man's word. They don't realize that the Bible too is a work of humans, right? It's just one that isn't very well supported. And so I think that's another thing that is really critically missing from the conversation. When you talk to people who believe this, they really do treat that like you'll have a conversation. They will treat it like you are literally representing this crazy stuff these deluded scientists are talking about. But what they're talking about, like, it comes straight from the mouth of God. And really, it's important for them to understand, hey, if you're gonna like even have a decent conversation coming from good faith, you've got to understand that for the perspective of, again, what actually happens in the real world, your Bible is a human work itself, right? So yeah, just I would definitely go there if that ever came up in conversation.
Right. I completely agree with you. I would say, first you have to prove that there even is a God before you can say that there's even God's word. I mean, let's go all the way back. You're bringing all kinds of baggage just by saying that this is God's word. But anyway, I also think it's funny to say that science is man's, or evolution is man's word. Evolution is just the description that we put on what we found to be reality.
Yes.
And that, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's just the way it is.
And that is an actual, that's a really, it's sort of very telling if someone says that, because of what you said. It's like, no, actually we ran out in the world and we looked at it and this is the description we came to. And it's very telling that there's a dissonance, that they don't want to acknowledge, that they want to say that this is what people are saying, it's what they're claiming. They keep, why won't they stop saying that? And it's like, no, because there's that's what we're observing in the world.
Yep. I thought it was interesting what Biologos had to say about it. I was honestly confused by it, because it starts out by saying, first, it should be noted that there are lots of women working on evolution too. So if it's God's word, that's dangerously close to blasphemy. These theories of origins are put together by people, and then underlined, all of them attempt to interpret the Bible responsibly. So I was very confused by that, because that statement is not saying that everyone who makes that statement is everyone who is in science or believes in evolution is trying to interpret the Bible. It almost made it seem like that. Like,
yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And that is largely the problem with these people who insist that both things must be true, right? Is they're trying to massage what they get out of science to fit into the biblical framework. And I think that's really dangerous. And it really does. And I believe this. I was a Christian who believed God worked through natural means. So it set up this false expectation that anything I learned about the natural world would fit within the biblical framework. And that just wasn't honest. That wasn't an honest understanding of science. And I feel like it set me back. I had to really learn a lot of those things. And I don't talk about it because I've never really found a space to, but that's a very alienating process, right? It's like very disorienting to be like learning all of this stuff, trying to figure out how it fits into your religion, sort of realizing the people around you in the religion aren't taking the science seriously. The people in science aren't even considering the religious worldview, and you're kind of left to piece that all together on your own. It's tough.
Yeah, it does. So the next thing goes right into that. This goes right into the next one.
Sure.
The plain reading of Scripture clearly supports six-day creation.
Yeah, so this is one I'm like tempted to agree.
I agree with that too. What I'm trying to figure out is, why is this a misconception of evolutionary biology? But this is where Biologos put this. And so
yes,
I kind of felt like we needed to talk about it.
I see. Yes.
How is this evolutionary biology misconception?
Because I think what they're trying to do is create that space for interpretation. Even if you go down, they said, if plain reading means what the words clearly mean in my language and culture, then I suppose Exodus 20:11 could be used to support six-day creationism. But if that is really how we're supposed to read Scripture, then 1 Samuel 2:8 means the earth is set on pillars, and Deuteronomy 21:21 means we should stone our rebellious sons, and John 15:5 means Jesus is a plant, and Romans 16:6 means we should kiss everyone we meet. So I think they're doing some less than honest conflating there, right? They're taking things that are clearly poetic or clearly language of imagery, and conflating that with other passages that are clear, that actually are very clear commands, or actually are very clear word for word. So I think for me, the description of Genesis, which I certainly take to be a myth, that's the story that's in there. I think the reason they see this as a misconception of evolution is they want to argue that, of course, you should be interpretive. This leaves you open to day age creationism or old earth creationism, or I think really by Logos's case, it's more even theistic evolution. And so I think they're in that case being less than honest about evolution and less than honest about the Bible. But this is what's necessary, right? Because, and this is one of the things this is why I don't think you can do this compatibility. I don't think creationism is inherently a supernatural idea. It's inherently arguing that God did it. Evolution is a naturalistic explanation. It's always going to say that there's no God required. And I think what a lot of these people are doing is sort of a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They're taking the science and they're saying, oh, we understand it's all about nature. We understand it's not confirming our idea. But then they're coming over to their fellow believers and go, but see how the science really agrees with us, but see how the science really supports our Bible. And
Right.
you can't do that with a literal interpretation of Genesis. And so they're basically trying to say you shouldn't take Genesis literally. And then once you don't take Genesis literally, you can accept evolution and still believe that it's consistent with your faith, which is what people are coached to do. So
yeah, I think that that's a very slippery slope, though.
Right.
Because if you don't take Genesis literally, then how do you know what to take literally and how do you know what not to take literally? That's the problem with religion as a whole. That's why you have so many denominations and people arguing and fighting over things, and frankly, why you have three Abrahamic religions to begin with, because they all looked at things completely differently and taken their own stuff.
And Genesis is also where we get the notion of a creator God from. So this is sort of the problem I have with deism, is where is this God coming from, if not from these stories, right? About the creator God. What does it even mean to be God if you're not a creator, or if you're not actively engaged in creation? So to me, okay, you want to say it's metaphorical or it's poetic, but then you're saying your God is metaphorical or poetic, right? And so I don't think people are being honest with themselves about that. They want to say, I'm not silly. I don't take the creation story literally, but I do take the God of that story literally. And I do think he literally created us. And I do think he literally is in control of our lives. And I do think he's going to judge me when I die and all of this other stuff. So, it's a real issue.
Yeah. Yep. I wanted to touch on that, like I said, because it was.
No, I think it's a good point. Yeah.
But we have a little bit more than 15 minutes, and I really want to get to two that we hear all the time. We hear them all the time. So the first one is there are no transitional fossils.
Yeah. Okay. It's a good one. So my quick counter is always they're all transitional fossils, right? And what we mean by that is, evolution is an ongoing process, and so everything that dies is part of that process. I mean, even if it's not a lineage that goes on, it still shows you what the population, what a member organism in the population was at one point. But there's something sort of different they're talking about. So let's keep that in mind. Just if you want a quick one-liner, they're all transitional fossils. That's just the way you deal with that. But what they're really talking about a lot of times is intermediate fossils. They're saying something like, um, we supposedly share common ancestry with chimps or whatever. Where are the transitional fossils from, right? And what they're really getting at is intermediate forms. And what they should understand is that the fossil record is replete with intermediate forms. First off, a lot of things don't preserve well. Soft tissue, most of bodies don't preserve well. There's weather, there's geological processes. I mean, it's kind of amazing that so many fossils survive the way they do. And I mean, especially when you think like going back to, we have fossil evidence from billions of years ago. So we have tons of these intermediate forms, like an embarrassment of riches. And I think it's really ignorant when people say that there are no transition near fossils. That is a line that comes straight from an apologist's mouth and is just wholehearted regurgitated without a person looking into it. And it's one of those things, you can even like pick out two organisms and start to think about and just start randomly guessing about what an intermediate form between them would look like. And there are literally a described and known fossil that meets that description. We have exercises you can do in like the MSU museum. There's like this big digital like tree of life thing you can do, and you can literally pick any two organisms and it'll go back and like show you like their common ancestry and then all the like intermediate species like between them. So it's a face palm like, so like, oh, like that's so dumb, like flat earth dumb thing to say.
Right.
But fortunately it is one of the easier misconceptions to correct.
Yeah. Yep. It is. And well, it I don't know if it's easy to correct because someone has to be willing to look at the evidence.
Yes.
Oftentimes
they're
it's
willing to
hard
look at
to
the
get
evidence.
them
Yeah.
to look at the evidence.
I got to be honest with you, that I would say that is probably the biggest misconception about the acceptance of evolution.
Right.
It really at this point doesn't have anything to do, I think, with the evidence, or very little to do with evidence. A person really has to become open to the idea that maybe the people in church didn't know everything, and open to the idea that science has something to teach them, and open to the idea that they might be wrong. And then the evidence is readily available and will work its magic pretty readily.
Yeah. All right. The final one is kind of a twofer. Evolution claims that we evolved from monkeys. Just saying that makes me laugh.
Yeah.
And if we evolved from monkeys, why are there still monkeys around?
All right. So one is evolution doesn't claim that we evolved from monkeys. It claims that we evolved from common ancestry with monkey, and really more common ancestry with apes. But our buddy out here, Aaron Ra, actually argues that we evolved from monkeys, and I actually think he's right. So and the distinction there is this, like, if we share common ancestry with it, we share common ancestry that's undeniable. But if apes and monkeys are like higher level sister groups, right, then there's a chance our last common ancestor didn't share it, right? And we're derived later and monkeys are derived separately later. But I think Aaron Ra's argument, which I think is an important one to understand, one is the law of monophily. So anything that is descendant from a particular group remains that group. Once a dog, always a dog type of thing. And that if you look at the what we think about our last common ancestor, we think they were a monkey. And so largely, I think part of this is history, and a lot of the way taxonomy was done in primates was the groupings and the names were done in a way that wasn't necessarily consistent with how we did things in other groups. It was done differently so that humans would be special, so that we'd be in a separate group, for instance, if you if you use certain definitions of species, you would argue that us and chimpanzees might even still be the same species. But I actually think I think it is accurate. I'm kind of laughing and messing around, but I actually do think it is accurate to say that we evolved from monkeys, and to say that we are monkeys and that we're still monkeys. And so then the question then becomes, why are there still other groups of monkeys around? And that largely becomes because we decided to name one group of monkeys apes. And so that became a special group, and we call the other ones monkeys. But no, it's what people are not understanding when they say that is they're thinking of evolution as a linear progression.
Right.
That you start with an older form, and as things improve and progress, you get these newer, higher, more evolved forms, and that the older forms go away. And that's not what happens. What really happens is you have populations, they usually get split, and as they split, they get reproductively isolated, and they're able to evolve different traits from there. And so, we share common ancestry with the other groups of monkeys. And at some point we split off and we evolved different traits, like we got bigger and we lost our tails and we started walking more upright and we changed our diets and all this type of stuff, started living in massive groups. And they continued to do their thing that they were doing, and so they evolved in their own way. And that's another thing that people don't realize is extant monkeys are not, or monkeys that are currently alive are not the same as archaic or deceased monkeys, right? So they have continued to evolve, and they're just as highly evolved and just as contemporary and just as modern as we are. They're just evolved to a different niche. So you shouldn't think of, they're also thinking monkeys of like a lower form, like, and they're less evolved. They're not. There are species that we refer to as like living fossils. The tarsier is one of them. So these are organisms that have been around for eons and eons, but we also think have not changed very much. But for the most part, there's been a lot of evolution in old world and new world monkeys. And they're very different than their sort of prehistoric ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to go back to what you said about they think that they're looking at it as a linear progression.
Yes.
I completely agree with you. It's hard to conceptualize that you can have the splitting of a population, and that they kind of go in different directions in a sense. But also, I think it's because they look at the progression of mankind, whatever that is, whatever they believe, as being guided by an intelligence. As like,
right.
There had to, like, if evolution is true, then it has to be that. Then it has a purpose or a goal that it's reaching. You know what I mean? There's a specific place that it's designed to improve a species, to get it to the highest thing. And so why are there still species that aren't evolved like we are? You know, why
Yes.
are, you know what I'm saying? And it's
Yes.
difficult for them to see that there is no purpose. There's no goal. There's no plan for evolution. It just happens. Sometimes evolution is a positive and sometimes it's a negative, and that determines what happens in, you know, for each species or each organism.
Yeah, and that's the yes, that is a huge misconception that there's this progress. And one of the things you can think of to help you realize that's not true is that simpler organisms are still around. You know, we still see lots of single-celled organisms, and we still see lots of very simple plants and lots of very simple animals. I was watching a bird massacre a worm the other day in my yard, you know, and it's not like we created these really complex things and all of a sudden there were no worms, you know. So I think this is a good place to leave it, because I think this is the setup for part 3. I think I have so I have a presentation to share with you guys that I think it basically talks about evolution as a radical concept. Like, why is it a radical theory? Why did it really revolutionize science? And it gets at 3 inherent misconceptions that are a big part of this. And so I think that would be a great way to cap this series. We'll come back and we'll do
Absolutely. That. Okay, that sounds great. So in the meantime, I want to thank everyone who participated in the live chat. We love you guys. Thank you so much. Oh, and let me take off my little banner there. I just realized I left it on. There we go. We so much appreciate y'all. We want you to remember that you can support us by commenting on the live stream or on the show later. Like, subscribe, hit the bell. Share this out. We love that. But also you can become a patron. And if you become a patron, you're helping us to become a 501c3, which is fantastic. So we want to thank Helen Green, Logan Fisher, Amanda McLeod, Eric Ozols, Ryan, Denise Murphy, Dandy, Michael Wiseman, Cindy Plaza, me, Aaron Coalson, and Phil Calderone. You guys are doing what helps us to become a 501c3 and keep the lights on and all of that great stuff. But
hey, before we go,
leave,
oh yeah, all right. So I'm helping Skeptic Haven produce a new show. It's going to be coming up on Mondays, but that's all we're going to say. It's going to be dope. There's nothing like it. We can say there's nothing like it in this community, and stay tuned. It's going to be very exciting.
Absolutely. And there's some really cool people who are going to be involved with it.
Yes, that we can also say. There's some superstars that are going to be involved. Yes.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool. And if you like that, that's right. But, you know, keep in mind, we have Tuesdays with Secular Soapbox. Of course, you have Thursdays here with Study Spot. Saturdays has both the Global Atheist and Women Atheist Unload. And then on Sundays, we have Let's Talk. So now we'll have a Monday show as well. That'll be so cool. Right. You just practically the whole week with Skeptic Haven. And who wouldn't love to spend their week with Skeptic Haven, right?
That's right.
There's something for everybody. So we just want to thank all of you guys. We want to thank all of our people who give us the super chats and all of that stuff too, because you really do help. But in the meantime, and next time, always remember to think critically. Good night, everybody.
We'll see you later.
Our being knows this is where we came from. We long to return. And we can, because the cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
If we are not able to ask skeptical questions, to interrogate those who tell us that something is true, to be skeptical of those in authority, then we're up for grabs for the next charlatan, political or religious, who comes ambling along.